Hey everybody, I want to talk about a micro cap stock called Great Lakes Dredge, ticker symbol GLDD. This is a stock I've talked about for several months, and the stock price here has dropped recently after the Q3 earnings. So I think it is a good buy right now, and I'll explain why in this video. So Great Lakes Dredge and Dock was founded in 1890, so over 130 years ago. They recently moved their headquarters to Houston, Texas in 2021 for strategic reasons. The company owns roughly 200 specialized vehicles in the dredging space. The company operates three principal types of dredging equipment: hopper dredges, hydraulic dredges, and mechanical dredges. The number of employees varies greatly depending on their needs. During slow times, the company may only employ about 400 employees, but during busy times, that could rise to about 1,000 employees. So you may be wondering what the dredging business does. Well, the dredging business generally involves the enhancement of preservation of waterways or the protections of shorelines through the removal or replenishment of sand or rock. The business is split into four different segments. So their capital business, which is about 53% of the revenue; coastal protection, which is about 30% of the revenue; maintenance, which is 15% of the revenue; and rivers and lakes, which is roughly 2% of the revenue. Now, the company does operate internationally, but is less than 1% of their total revenue. The dredging industry is an oligopoly, so there are very few players, and Great Lakes is the largest of those players. They own roughly 35% of the total market space. In fact, only three companies comprise 80% of the bid market. The reason why there are so many few players in this business is that it's a difficult space to get into, because number one, they have very high capex requirements. It costs a lot of money to build ships and wait for those ships to be built at specific specs. In addition, the dredging companies are required to get a bid bond, which is required by the service provider on dredging contracts, which is approximately 20% of the total bid, which equates to about $1 million to $10 million. This bond would pay out the owner of the contract if the dredging company did not come through. The company has recently entered into a new market, which is the offshore wind market. This will diversify the customer base and bring in a new revenue stream. This market, however, is not expected to make an impact in the business until late 2024 or most likely in 2025. However, the Biden administration committed to a goal of 30 gigawatt of offshore capacity by 2030 and is expected to grow at a 21% CAGR rate through 2030. Great Lakes should have a hand up in their space for the offshore wind market over the next several years. Towards the beginning of 2023, the government did announce some big record funding for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is the largest customer for Great Lakes. In fact, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers budget is roughly at $8.5 billion, which they expect about $2.3 billion to go to the dredging industry. Over 95% of the company's revenue generated in 2022 came from federal and local government contracts. So needless to say, it is very important to Great Lakes and the dredging industry in general when the U.S. government is willing to fund that industry. It is a reason why the stock has fallen down so much over the 18 months as the government was slowing their spending. But we're seeing a reversal of that here this year with a number of different awards that were awarded here recently, which we'll talk about in a bit. So here's a snapshot of the backlog for Great Lakes Dredge. You can see that has fallen off from 2018 at $707 million, went all the way down to $377 million in 2022, which has scared the market. Now, at the end of June 2023, it ticked up to $435 million. Now, at the end of Q3, it sat at over $1 billion of backlog, which is one of the largest backlogs they had over the last several years. Now, backlog is future revenue, but is not instantaneous. It can take years from the start of a bid, then winning the project, then finally executing and completing the project. So it is vital for the company to keep a healthy backlog to sustain future revenue and profits. Something else I should point out is that capital projects in general carry the best profit margins for Great Lakes. And like I talked about earlier, 53% of their revenue is usually consisted of capital projects. Now, historically, the company has had their best margins and their best years when capital projects represent around 70% or more of their total revenue. What's really promising is that last quarter alone, the company won over $500 million in capital projects, which advocates even further that the company is set up well going into 2024 and 2025. Going into Q4 2023, 71% of the backlog consists of capital projects. I should also point out the company is expected to begin work in Q2 2024 on the Rio Grande LNG project, which is the largest project ever done by Great Lakes. This project is expected to take about 2.5 years to fully complete. So here's an income statement over the last several years for Great Lakes. You can see the highest revenue they've had since 2016 was roughly $733 million. Now, this year for 2023, the revenue is expected to drop down to about $600 million, which is the lowest they've been at over about a 10-year mark. Now, management did come out and say during the last earnings call that they do expect to be in that $200 million range for revenue in Q4. So that should push them to around $600 million in revenue for the entire year. But operating margins for this year and last year are negative, which is obviously a problem. So let's talk valuation for Great Lakes. How do I think the stock is going to perform over the next year, and why do I personally own it and plan to add more stock to my position? Well, here is just a small snapshot of what their book value per share looks like over the last 10 years. Currently, it sits around a 1.1. Historically, they've averaged around a 1.8. So that alone looks like they are undervalued. However, a book value per share doesn't tell you everything. It does look at equity of the business. But for me, in order to project what a stock price is going to be, this is how I am looking at it. On the recent earnings call, management believes 19% of their backlog will be used in Q4 2023, with much of the backlog falling into 2024. Some of it will hit in 2025 and in 2026, but most of it will be earned in 2024. From what I've seen and heard, at least $500 million in revenue should hit in 2024. I expect additional award wins over the next 2 quarters, which will push up revenues even further. I think it is very probable the company will hit revenue in the range of $750 million to $800 million next year, which will be the highest yearly revenue since 2015. The company has reduced SG&A expenses over the past year, so this should lead to more profit in 2024. If the company can hit the $750 million in revenue, it should lead to EPS in the range of 70 cents to $1. The company has historically been around the 17 PE range, so that should lead to a stock price in the range of $12 to $17 if they can hit that revenue in the $750 to $800 million range. Now, the key will be the backlog and the sustained government funding. If the company can continue to keep their backlog in the $700 million range, it should lead to substantial stock increases over the next year. It's also very important that the company takes on more capital projects. I think it is really good that 71% of their total backlog right now is capital, and that should help their margins going into 2024. Historically, their best years have been when their capital projects have been over 70%, so it looks like they're heading that direction into next year. So those are my thoughts on Great Lakes Dredge. This is why I like the company and where the stock price is right now. I think there is a higher than not chance that the stock price is going to rise over the next year based on today's stock price. But I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. What do you think about Great Lakes? What stocks are you buying right now? Love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and God bless.